Well, hello and welcome. I'm sorry that we don't have a break now, but you're still in good condition, I guess, and I just follow up. My name is Juri Troy. I'm running an office in Vienna, in Austria, and I would like to show you about our work. But first of all, I would like to show you some pictures from the region where I'm coming from. This is the western part of Austria. It's called Vorarlberg. It's close to Switzerland. And, well, the reason why I want to show this is, first of all, I think it's quite important to know where you're coming from and where your roots are. And second of all, I think these kind of structures have a very strong impact on my work, which is very strongly connected to timber constructions and also to energy efficiency and sustainable architecture. And for me, these structures show so much of a very clever way of doing architecture, because the people that were living up there in these mountains were on a very pragmatic way forced to deal with what they had. So you see that doesn't work. So you see they were just taking what they had. So there were a lot of trees around, and there were stones that were building the basement of the houses with. So for them it was so important to not be able to use any other material, but just what they could find close to their sites. These were very pure structures, and it was not just important the way to build it, but also to run it, because the winters up there in the mountains are quite strong. And therefore, it was essential to live during the winter to be able to heat the house in a very simple way. Of course, they were also using wood to heat up the houses. And with all the old pictures that you can see, you can find a really huge mountain of wood. They had to cut it during the summertime. And the rule was very simple. The less wood you have to cut in summertime, the more you can spend on producing food, milk, whatever, to get through the winter. So it was a very essential way of thinking about efficiency. This was a very typical way these houses were built. So you could see here the main room was this central hall that was also used as a kitchen, the living room, and up there the sleeping room, and this was the space for the cows. So the kettle was also used to protect the rest of the house, because the kettle were heating up the house, and the rest of the heating was done very central in the middle of the house. It was used for cooking and heating as well. So while cooking, you could already heat up the house, and at the end of the day, when you were walking up in the upper level, you could just open a small hole in the ceiling, and the rest of the warm air would go up and even heat up the sleeping room upstairs. So a very efficient way of heating a house. What I don't like on the houses was that they were always reacting quite strong on the context. So every house is situated on a different place, and therefore is working in a different way as well, which you can see quite nice here on this section. And although these conditions up there were so hard and very difficult to live at, the people developed a way of treating wood in a very sensible and sensitive way, which I also think is quite important nowadays if we are talking about the right way of using materials. So for example, here you can see that different parts of the wood were used in a different way. So the rougher parts for the main constructions, for the floor, for these parts of the wall, and then the more fine parts of the wood for the windows, for example, where they were able to create window frames with just about 8 millimeters. And the best parts of the wood were used for the furniture. And therefore, although the conditions were quite hard, they were able to create spaces. They were also offering some kind of poetic, I think. Of course, nowadays we have completely different conditions and different needs for houses and for living. Of course, we need more time to spend in houses. Actually, nowadays, people in Central Europe spend about 90% of their life inside houses. Therefore, it's quite important to have completely different indoor climate conditions. Also, of course, it's quite important to offer outdoor spaces as well, and a healthy indoor climate in general. One very specific project where we were focusing on all these aspects was the Velux Sunlight House. It was a project that we were finishing about 5 years ago. And it was a challenge to create a house that would show how living 2020 could look like, but in 2010. So we managed to create a house that was the first carbon neutral house in Austria. It's situated on a quite different plot because it has 2 quite big houses on both sides. And the slope is going toward the north, which is not quite practical for the use of sunlight. But as you can see here, we tried to bring in as much daylight as possible. So in this section, you can see all the part of the house is stretching toward south to bring in all the levels as much daylight as possible. And we were using only renewable energy. So this is a heat pump that is getting the energy from the earth. We were using photovoltaic on the rooftop, solar panels to produce the warm water, skylights to bring active sunlight in. And additional, we developed ventilation systems that were working naturally in the warm period of the year to save energy. And another ventilation system for the cold period of the year with heat exchange that is reducing the energy by another 85% as well. So what happened during these 2 years of design process was that we were working so much together with all different kind of engineers to be able to show that this house is creating more energy than it will ever need to run it, for all the transport and all the materials as well. So this means the house is something like a small power plant. And after 30 years, it will get rid of the whole footprint that it has and will produce even more energy from that point on. So here you can see the equality between what the house needs and what it offers on energy. Just to understand what was really happening on this process, you really have to calculate every part of the house, every material, every part of window, how much energy is getting in, how much is energy getting out, etc., etc. Therefore, we were working with Daylight Laboratory, for example. It's a room where you can simulate every day of the year and every hour of the day with sunlight condition. and getting out this daylight diagram where you can see exactly which amount of energy in which room can be provided. And of course, it was very important also what kind of material to use. And I think that's also a very important thing if we are talking about sustainable architecture. It's not just about reducing the amount of energy that the house needs, but also not to put too much energy into the house at all. Because if you're using concrete, for example, or if you're using polyethylene or other oil products, it's so much energy that is already built in the house that you will never be able to save it during the whole period of the lifetime. So we were using, for example, recycled paper as insulation. We were using sheep wool as insulation or flax. This, for example, is wood wool, so all renewable materials. And most of all, we were using timber. So like here, these cross-laminated timber panels. What we came out then at the end of this process was this diagram that was showing all the different aspects that we were focusing on in terms of the sustainability. And very simply explained, the bigger the white area on this diagram is, the more you can say that it's a holistic approach on the building. So the ideal form of a building would be a completely white area, which of course you will never be able to fulfill. But then getting on with this idea of to understand the building, we added all these other aspects as well, because it's not just about indoor climate at all, and it's not just about energy, but it's also about so many different aspects that are connected with building as well. So for me, this altogether is what we are doing as architects. And therefore, it's quite important to understand that we as architects are not the only part of the building culture, Baukultur, that we are discussing in Austria quite a lot. But it's so important that you have the right atmosphere around, that you have the right clients that are understanding what you're doing, that you have the right regulations, that you have companies that are able to build these kind of things. So it's so important that you're just one part and that you understand this to produce this kind of architecture, I guess. To understand a little bit the way of our thinking of architecture, I brought you 4 examples of our office that I want to show you now shortly. This was one house of a small family. They contacted me because they saw the other house before. And they said, okay, we would like to have a house like that as well, but we just have about half of the amount of money. Well, so we met on this site, and then they said, okay, we just have about half amount of money, but with this half amount, we also have to buy the plot, which made it even more difficult then. But they were so sympathetic, and we said, okay, we're just going to try that. And they offered us, okay, we can reduce our needs. And this is also something that is so important, I think, for our future. Because the last years or decades, at least in Central Europe, everything was just about increasing the quantity. It was always just about bigger and higher and more space. But I think we have to focus again on quality, reducing space and therefore offering more quality in this space. And that's what we try to do with this project. So we're offering them a design of a very reduced house on a small basement, set up like a table, and put this small box up there that ended up like this at the end. as a passive house with a completely closed facade to the north, with an insulation of 60 centimeters, which is quite strong, and a completely open facade to the south, where you can see exactly the wideness of the roof is that far that in summertime, this is the condition in June, the completely south facade is protected by the shadow. And in winter time, you're getting in a lot of sunlight deep into the space. And the whole house is set up on these 6 columns to offer some additional outdoor space where you can put the car, but also make some barbecue in summertime, or as a playground for the children and so on. Here you can see the very simple section, and the other section that is showing all the thick insulation that is covering the whole house. The small bases that is not heated, but just offering some additional space. And here the main floor. That was the main challenge as well. Because, well, what we were talking with these clients was, okay, if you want to save all this money and buy a really construct a really cheap house, it's a reduction of needs. And they were agreeing with that, yeah, that's no problem. But then we offered them the design, and then they said, yes, that's perfect. But what we need as well is a small storage for the kitchen. What we actually also need is a small space for a washing machine, etc. What we need as well is a sauna. We would like to have a bigger bathroom. And we would like also to have space for the mother-in-law that is coming now and then as a guest. And then I said, okay, but then it's just a normal house, so then it's not a reduction of needs. But then we could offer them an idea of how to use this small space in a way that we could offer them all these different functions. So I just show you quickly. This is the wardrobe where you enter, the toilet, which actually is the only space in the whole house with a door, the kitchen, the storage for the kitchen. This is the washing place for the washing machine and the dryer and the clothes. This actually is the guest room for the mother-in-law. The good thing about it is that she's from Japan, and people from Japan are used to live on small spaces. So this is the storage for the sleeping room, the office as well. I don't know, they wanted to have it in the sleeping room, so I don't know why. The children's room, which is actually the biggest one in the whole house, the bathroom, the sauna, living area, dining area, the entrance, and the big terrace. Altogether, we could offer on 100 square meters. And this is how the space looks like from inside out. A very simple structure. The terrace, which was also a very important space for this family because, as I mentioned, the wife is from Japan. And in Japan, it's the people are used to put off their shoes before they enter the house. So they need a small space that is called genkan, where you step onto the step of the house, but you're still outside. You put off your shoes, and then you go into the house, which I think is a very nice idea of understanding what is a house, what is inside, and what is outside. Yeah, and this is the hallway with all these storages, and this is the space for the mother-in-law. And now they are living there for 2 years, and they say they still have a lot of storage which they don't need. And this is little Leo, who is quite enjoying the house. And from the energy concept, as I mentioned, it's a passive house. So we just need about 9 kilowatt hours per square meter heat amount. We are working with a heat pump with a big collector, 8 square meters of photovoltaic, mechanical ventilation system with heat exchange. And the whole house is costing about 360 euros per year, which is €1 per day. Although they were using about 170 days a year the sauna, for example. So if you put that off, it's just about 50 cents per day, I guess. And we could manage to stay in the budget that they had, which was, of course, quite important for them. Another project, another house that is located in Vorarlberg. You can see the plot here. It's on about 1,000 meters height. Well, it's a small village, the village center you see here, with quite a nice view. This is actually the farmhouse of the father of the client. And houses like this. And this is the typical traditional way they were building houses there. And for me, it's quite a strong reference because it's such a way of using timber and such a over hundreds of years developed way of architecture that you really have to try to get close to these kind of qualities, I guess. And therefore, I'm always interested in traditional architecture because I think you can take so much of the ideas and of the qualities of this architecture. Here you can see the plot. So all this was belonging to the client. And they were asking me to do 2 houses, one for them and one for apartments to rent. And when we discussed about it, we found out that it's not very clever to do 2 houses because they have very strong winters up there with a lot of snow up to 3 meters. And of course, you would always have to go from here to there to run this house. And then they came up with the idea of, yeah, why not making a tunnel, for example, and things like that. And I thought it's just too stupid. So I came up with the idea of making just one house and to put the shape like this that we can move it as much to the left as possible to keep another part of the plot for maybe another house later. Here you can see the shape of the house that is, well, at least connected to the traditional houses in the surrounding. And that was one of the first rendering sketches that we did. And that was the way we finished the house then. So by shaping the house with this hexagonal shape, you can see that it looks very different from all the sides, and it changes the scale quite a lot. From this side, it's quite a huge house. And that comes because we have a quite steep slope. And that was the idea to use the main entrance for the private clients to create a 2-storage living unit on the top and use the second level to enter the house here for the apartments and have down there these 3 apartments that can be run completely individual. With garage and another entrance on the bottom, with a staircase in the middle that is connecting all the 4 levels. And you can see the 3 apartments here. And the living area of the client, and then the sleeping area of the client as well on the rooftop. And here the rooftop itself, that was also quite important to use this to bring in a lot of light but also a lot of energy and a lot of possibility of ventilation during the whole period of the year. Yeah, just some details about how it was constructed. Actually, it's done in a completely way of using massive timber. So it's all cross-laminated timber plates, which is quite interesting because you can build the whole 3D model. Everything is prefabricated in the company and comes on the site just on millimeter cut it. In sheets like this, they are up to 12 meters long and about 2.5 meters wide. And in this case, 14 centimeters strong. And also here you can see, for example, this is the prefabricated staircase that was all done, completely finished in the company, and then just set in with the crane, one level after the other. And after just about 4 days, the whole house was set up. So this was after the 4 days. And also the whole parts of windows were completely prefabricated. So you can see here all the connections, everything was done, just set there with the crane, screwed from inside, and then everything was already finished. What you can see here is all these skylights, as I mentioned before. But what you also see is the thickness of insulation that we were using on the rooftop, more than 40 centimeters to protect against the cold winters. And that was how the spaces inside looked like after the first week. So it's close to move in. It's only actually the floor that is missing. And this is the space then when we finished the project with the same view that you saw at the beginning. The staircase is prefabricated, and the windows, the skylights from inside. These are the apartment rooms. That was very important for the family because the woman decided to run these apartments as some kind of a new job for her. So she wouldn't need to go somewhere else because in this village, of course, there are not too many jobs offered. On the facade, we were using these traditional shingles as the old houses were also using. The cutted entrance and the way to treat the details as well. And I think for me this is also a very important way if we are talking about architecture and the precise way of using materials, that actually every single part of the house is so much thought about that you don't have any waste or any material that is not set on the right place. The energy roof with the photovoltaic panels integrated. And of course, nowadays you can see all the income of energy on the tablet and see the whole calculation of the year, etc. And what is produced more, and actually it is produced much more than we calculated, because we are so high on 1,000 meters that we have much more sunny days a year. The more of production of energy is now used for the electric car. He bought an electric car just for that. And here the energy concept in total again. So we have 112 square meters of photovoltaic, 15 square meters of solar panels for the warm water, mechanical ventilation system again, and the controlled window ventilation. And actually this is a small biomass plant that was already existing. I think it's also quite a clever way of heating a village, which you can see here. So here is the site where the house is. Here is where all the wood came from that we were using for this house here. Up there's the saw where the wood was cutted. Here is the power plant where all the rest of the wood that is not able to be used for constructions comes to in just small pieces to heat. And about 112 houses in this village are heated with this rest of the forest, say. And altogether, it's just in a ring of about 600 meters. So that means it's sustainable in a way that this material never left this small part of the village, actually. And also the companies that were working on this project were just out of a circle of about 25 kilometers. Well, this was how the house was run in the first winter. As you can see here, this is a small skiing resort where the people are enjoying their holidays there. And well, this is the house. Actually, as I said, it's producing much more energy than was calculated, and therefore it's by far an active house. So again, producing in total more than it ever needs for heating, consumption for lights, warm water, etc. Another issue that is also quite important for me is renovation. In Austria, there are thousands and thousands of houses like this. They were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, mostly too big for one family and too small for two. And it's quite expensive to run them now because the energy prices in Austria are quite high. So this family was living in there with 8 children, and 6 of them left and 2 stayed. These 2 were twins. And these twins came up to me and they said, okay, we want to change this house and we want to add 2 flats. And these 2 flats have to be completely the same because we are twins. And I said, well, that's difficult, but let's see where we can get. And we came up with this. So we said we keep most of the structure, but we changed the whole house. From the top side, it looked like that, and after that, like this. And the concept that we showed them was, okay, we keep the main parts of the structure, we lift off the garage and the rooftop, and we add 2 completely new parts that are so different that you will not be able to choose which is the best or the better one. And both together then created this new house. Everything was again prefabricated in timber, which is quite helpful because during the whole construction process, the parents were still living in this house. And you can imagine that's not quite easy to work with, but they were quite brave. And well, what we managed to do was that we could create one flat that is oriented completely vertical and the other one completely horizontal. And the funny thing was, during the whole process of design, always the 2 twins were sitting there and not telling me who is going into which flat. And when we were close to construction, I said, okay, but guys, now tell me who is taking which flat. They were not even looking to each other, but just one said, we never talked about it, but I think we know. And the other one said, yes, of course we know. And yeah, and then they just moved in. So, and well, here you can see how much this extension of the construction is. It's more than 5 meters, only done in timber, without any steel. That was necessary because the father of the clients wanted to keep the whole garden. He said, I love my garden and I don't want to give 1 square meters of my garden. You can do whatever you want, but just don't take my garden. Well, we managed, and this is how the space looks like from the horizontal flat. It's more like a loft. And what we could also add was not just the space for the parents, but also the completely level of the garden is now used for a common space for the whole family. Because as I mentioned, there are 6 other family members that are living somewhere else. But of course, for all the family fests, they are meeting there. So like Easter or Christmas or some birthday. And now they have got one common space here of about 30 square meters where they can do the fests and also celebrate outside here on the garden. And we added 3 or 4 additional sleeping rooms, so always if somebody comes to visit the parents, they can always stay in the house. And after all, we could also manage to reduce the heat amount by 40%, although we doubled the complete space of the house. Yes. And now the last project, it's based in Switzerland, in the Appenzell, which is a quite special region, because, for example, they invented just about 10 years ago the right of women to vote, which says a lot about this region, I guess. The plot was this here. There was an old building that burned down, and we were asked to design about 15 new flats. And we decided to make 3 separate buildings and to shape these buildings in a way that they could get the maximum amount of sunlight during the whole year. So from every side, the rooftops were cut in such a precise way that they don't put shadow on the other house. Of course, this was also calculated with shadow models and daylight analysis. And therefore, we could manage to, if you see on this diagram above, nearly all the rooftops got 100% of effective sunlight energy that they would get. So, and these are the energy concepts again for every house that was done already in the design phase. And that was how or will be how the houses look like then. The north facade quite closed, and inside completely open then to the green. Thanks a lot. I shall ask you if there are some questions.
Піднімайте руку, я буду підходити до вас з мікрофоном.
I want to ask you, what is the budget of the square meter of this building?
Well, in Austria, actually, we are building in the moment houses between 2,000 and 3,000 euros per square meter. So 2,000, for example, is the small house on the 6 columns that we built. And, well, it's going up to 3,000, depending on what kind of standards you're using.
Including all equipments?
Including everything. So it's with all the equipment, most of the furniture, all the installations. Yeah, so you're getting the key and you move in.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
You showed a lot of, you showed a facade with the details of these shingles. How did you find the specialists to do it? Because it's not so common, or it's in the region.
Well, in this region, it is, thank God, still common. And that is something, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's so important that you still find the people to offer these things, that you are able to buy it, that there are people to know how to use these things, to construct it. And that's what I call with Baukultur, the building culture. It is so much about this connection of all the different parts of building. And that is something you really have to consider. If you go out and you develop your ideas, try to develop that with the companies. Try to develop it even with the clients. As soon as you start something on one project, it's a starting point to continue something and or continue a tradition or go further with a tradition. And I really think that is so important, because I also saw that you have quite beautiful traditional wooden architecture here in Ukraine. But what I heard is that building with timber is not very common anymore. And it's just like about a period of 30, 40 years, and you're losing all this tradition. And it's so difficult to get it back again. And yeah, once it's lost, then yeah, it's really a pity, I think. And it's with so many different things like that. It's the problem nowadays is that we are in a time where everything is affordable, or everything is able to just buy or get it from somewhere. But that's why I wanted to show you the pictures at the beginning. It is not just about what can I afford, but it's also about what is clever, what is logic, what is good to use on a certain place for a certain project or for a certain function. And mostly, I think, it's just the things that are around. Why to put things from the other side of the world to here to build something here with it? It's completely nonsense. Use the things that are really here, that are known to work with, and you will see the result will be just more based on where you are coming from and where actually your roots are.